Hello there. My name is Gary Bailey, and I'd like to welcome you to the Gary Bailey Motocross School. I'd like to take this opportunity, first of all, to thank the Wrangler brand people for their support in the Gary Bailey Motocross School, as well as in the sport of motocross. I think that we need more fine people, like the people from Wrangler, to help us to make our sport grow. I would like to say that my family wears Wranglers, and I think that whenever you go shopping, yours should too. The purpose of this film is for you to be able to study some of the top riders and what they're doing whenever they're riding out there on the racetrack, to study their body positions, all of the different things that they're doing out there on the track. We'll talk about different ideas about rights and wrongs and jumping techniques and cornering techniques. Most important is how to relax, how to work more with your motorcycle, and to keep more under control, and to learn to go faster and to be a safer rider. One of the most important things before we actually get started in the riding part of this film is understanding the motorcycle and how it works, proper position on the motorcycle, how your levers should be set, how your bars should be set, and what the rider is going to be doing when he's actually out there on the racetrack. One of the most important things is making sure your bars are not too high, because the position that you should assume on the motorcycle would be having your elbows up above the actual hands rather than having your elbows down, because the leverage that you have on the motorcycle and the control that you have over the motorcycle comes from across the shoulders and out in the elbows. If you ride with your arms in, the problem is that you end up with all of the leverage then coming in the handlebars, which requires you to have a much narrower set of bars on the motorcycle. Also, the levers should be pointed down slightly. So they're pointed down, going on the same angle as your arms are running, so that whenever you're out there on the racetrack and you need to use the levers, it's merely a matter of opening up your hands, grabbing a hold of the levers, and using them. If the levers are up too high, it means you have to drop your elbows in order to be able to get a hold of the levers. I think the next most important thing is where the rider is sitting on the motorcycle. And we're going to put a rider on the motorcycle so that we can show you what's happening to the rider out there on the racetrack in different positions. One of the most important things for this rider to realize is where he should stand on the bike and why he should stand there. The problem with most riders is they ride too far back on the motorcycle. Mark, sit down on the bike, right up to the gas tank. All right, keep your arms up high, so that when the bike is working and it's going through the rough section and it's working up and down, the rider can move with it. When the bike comes up, the elbows should raise all the time. Instead of dropping your elbows down here and letting the elbows stay in this position to where the elbows go back, you want the elbows to actually be going up and down whenever the rider's riding with the motorcycle. The problem is if you try and do the same thing and set to the back of the motorcycle, on the back of the seat, the rider ends up getting this motion and he gets rocked. It's also very difficult to keep your arms up in that position. It tends to make you want to drop your arms. Another problem that riders have when they gas it, slide back forward, Mark. When they gas it and they turn the throttle wide open, as they gas it, their elbow has a tendency to drop down most of the time because of the fact that they don't re-grip with the throttle. Most riders start with the throttle in this position, they gas it, the arm drops down, they end up with one elbow high and one elbow low. That's not good control on the motorcycle, and you've also lost your controlled leverage on the bike. So every time you get ready to gas it, you should actually slip your hand around the grip, turn the throttle on. Your elbow should not drop all the way down whenever you gas it. That way you're still in your most controlled position. When a rider stands up, the rider should stand straight up whenever he stands up. Legs should be slightly bent, arms should be slightly bent, and the rider should be loose so that the motorcycle works underneath him all the time. No matter what motion that this bike makes, the rider stays basically still and under control. When the rider gets back in this position and he stretches way back to the back, we'll clear back on the seat. The problem is there that any little bump the rider hits, he's going to be getting a kicking in the back end. It's going to be wanting to throw him forward all the time. Move back forward. The other problem is by staying clear back on the back of the motorcycle, it makes the rider hold on much tighter due to the fact that he has to keep such a grip, because once he makes a mistake, the only place for him to go is off the back of the motorcycle. In this position, he can stay much more relaxed all the time and totally be working with the motorcycle. The idea is to let all of your troubles be behind you, to not become a part of the problems. Remember that every time that the seat comes up and hits you in the tail and throws your weight forward, whether you're sitting or whether you're standing back near the back of the fender, it's been telling you where you should be on the bike all the time. It's telling you to move your weight forward. And as you watch this film, you're going to notice the riders that you're going to be watching are going to keep their weight forward the majority of the time. The way that you're holding onto the bars is extremely important, particularly for your acceleration coming out of the corners. The problem with most riders where they ride with their elbows in too much is whenever they gas it, the fact that the throttle does end up down, which is bad and puts you in that cramped position. A good gripping position is to run, when you're running with your elbows out, is to take and grab a hold of the throttle and turn the throttle more as though you were opening up a doorknob. It's like taking your hand and rolling your hand more in the side motion rather than twisting your wrist down. With the shorter pair of bars, with your elbows out, it's very easy to do this. With your elbows in tight, it's almost an impossible thing to do. So you roll your elbows out, take your hand, and twist the throttle so that your wrist moves and your elbow stays almost perfectly in still position. The question that a lot of riders ask is, where should your feet actually be on the foot pegs? Well, if you look at the bottom of most riders' boots, you'll notice that they stand entirely too firm on the boot and on the foot peg all of the time, meaning that there's a big mark on the arch of their foot. And what you want to do is be able to move around from the balls of your feet onto the arch of your feet. For instance, when you're in deep rutted sections and all, or you're really in an off-balance situation, the bike's laid over far, you want to get more onto the balls of your feet. So what you've got to be able to do is move around. Look at the bottom of your boot, and it'll tell you if you're light enough on the foot pegs and if you're moving around and loose enough, as you should be when you're riding.
What is the word practice? Practice is practicing things that you have trouble with. The most difficult thing to tell a racer is slow down and I'll teach you how to go faster. Have fun when you're out practicing. For instance, learning to do wheelies is very important and it's very useful to you out on the racetrack. Learning to do slow wheelies and not horsepower wheelies. Learning to do wheelies by using the rear brake, showing good throttle control, and good clutch control. Proper balance, and this will help you with your balance, learning to do wheelies. It will teach you how to have a better side-to-side balance and also front-to-back balance. Riding a unicycle can also be very helpful to you to learn to do better wheelies. Most riders do not know how to practice. They don't know how to have fun when they're out riding. They think that the only thing that's important is going out, getting on a racetrack, and going as fast as they can possibly go. There are several different things that riders can do and save their motorcycle and make it last longer and not abuse it out there on the racetrack. For instance, jumping across rain ruts, ditches, can be very useful to you. And learning different positions on the bike that you can be in, learning to hit some sitting down, learning to hit some standing up, learning that you should not pull the front end too high when you go across these ditches, that you should keep the bike as level as you possibly can. Learning to use your body to control the motorcycle and have a defensive movement when you're riding is very important. Learning to put your feet down as little as possible whenever you're riding is very helpful to you when you're out there on the motocross track. Going fast is not the most important thing, and if you want to improve your riding, the slower you go, the easier it is. In fact, learning to ride trials, even on your motocross bike, is very helpful to you. Riders should just learn to relax more and to have more fun whenever they're out riding. If you pull the front end too high, as you can see, the problem is that it drops the back end of the motorcycle, allowing it to hit the bank on the other side. The problem then is that the rider, once the impact comes to the motorcycle, it then has a tendency to throw the rider forward slightly. If you keep the bike more level, or even go across with the nose down slightly, the rear wheel has more of a tendency to clear it. Now, some riders don't even want to try these things because they've never jumped things like this before and they're afraid they're going to crash. They have no confidence. It makes no difference whether you're riding a mini bike or whether you're riding a bigger bike. you can still do this kind of practice session, and it will be very helpful to you. It's helpful to all riders. However, hitting this too slow can also be a problem. It allows the motorcycle to land the cases on the edge on the far side of the ditch, which can have a tendency to knock your feet off. It can also have a tendency to smash your exhaust pipe slightly. Because it stops the motorcycle so, it has a tendency to throw the rider out of control. There's all kinds of practicing that you can do, and just because you're out on a racetrack doesn't mean that you have to go out and go full throttle. Just relax when you're out riding and have fun. Practice different techniques. Practice sitting down, going into corners. Practice standing up, going into corners. A good place to ride is in the sand pit if you can find it, because it allows you to work on a lot of different techniques. It allows you to be able to relax a lot more and try new things, because of the fact that if you do fall down, you don't have to worry about hurting yourself. Find some steep uphills, some steep downhills, and try and go off places that you've never been off before, as long as they look safe to you. If it looks possible that a motorcycle can go down there, it's worth trying. Go down it as slow as you possibly can. Go up it as slow as you possibly can. If you find a bank that nobody's ever been up before, it's a good idea to think about trying it. Just make sure that the bike's not going to come back over on top of you. But remember, the most important thing, particularly if you're going to try and climb an uphill, is to approach it with confidence in the fact that you're going to make it, and to have a positive attitude about it. I think having a positive attitude is the most important thing in any part of your riding that you do. Be very careful in the downhills in deep sandy places, because the sand has a tendency to push down the hill and get a real soft spot down at the bottom, and you might land there and find yourself going over the handlebars. Sand pits are just a real fun place to go playing, because you can learn so much and have so much fun, and if you do fall, it doesn't hurt. Just going into corners and pitching the bike in there and laying it over as far as you can, and do wheelies coming out. Just kind of play and have yourself a good time. That's what playtime is. That's what practice is all about, enjoying yourself and learning newer and better ways of doing things. Regardless of a rider's age, it doesn't make any difference how old he is, even if he's riding a little 60. The practice is the most important thing, again, for this rider. If he can just learn to think about his body position, the way he sits on the bike, what he looks like, and if he's doing the proper things and if he's in the proper position, just going out and going fast is not the most important thing. Practice little slides around the corners. Getting the bike sideways is important to learn to slide the bike. Learning to work with your motorcycle whenever you're riding and not let the motorcycle bounce you around. A good technique for that is riding a lot of times by taking both feet off the foot pegs, keeping them high up out of the way, and riding over some rough sections, even going over some small jumps, not jumping too high in the air. But learning to ride with the feet off, it teaches you to move with the motorcycle so the motorcycle doesn't throw you all over the place. It teaches you better timing. Braking is probably one of the most important parts of racing, and particularly the faster you go, the more important the braking becomes. And there's different braking techniques that you can practice. For instance, most riders hate whenever they go into a corner, they grab a hold of the front brake and the front wheel locks up. Practice those braking exercises by pulling on the front brake and skidding the front wheel as far as you can. Nose dives are also important. Most people are afraid of grabbing too much front brake and going over the handlebars. Practice your braking, put on the front wheel brake as hard as possible, and just practice getting the rear wheel off the ground. First only an inch or two, and then lifting it as high as you want, as comfortable as you feel. The braking technique means you must use a lot of front brake, no rear brake. Transfer your weight forward. As you put on the front brake, the front forks will dive. Transfer your weight forward. Lighten up your foot pegs. Lighten up the seat slightly. And the back end of the bike will come up in the air. Stay loose, stay relaxed, and try and do this without putting your feet down. Obviously, starts are very important in a motocross race, and having the proper technique is very important. I think the biggest mistakes that riders make is they have a tendency to try and get off the starting line too quick and not take their time. They don't have the proper position on the motorcycle before they take off. It's optional whether you use both feet down on the ground or one foot up, as you're going to see later on during this film. The main thing is that you keep your weight well forward, you keep your feet just in front of the foot pegs, your arms are up slightly, your weight does not lean too far forward. You must keep an eye on the gate and learn the mechanism that trips the gate, so that as you see that mechanism move, you will be ready to go forward. Your hand should be on the clutch, either your whole hand or two fingers. The clutch should be released to the point that it's just ready to let go the minute the gate goes down. It's important that you don't wheelie coming off of the starting line, that you make a nice, clean, smooth start. You'll notice the first two riders on the left side of the picture here both have their feet down on the ground. However, the two riders on the right-hand side of the picture both have one foot up on the foot peg. The left three riders all have their elbows up in a very good position. The rider to the right of the picture has his elbows down slightly, which is going to have a little bit more of a tendency to wheelie the motorcycle coming off. When the gate goes down, it's important that you keep your weight as much forward as possible and that you let the clutch out slowly and kind of slip the clutch out. As you'll notice, rider number 26 coming off the starting line has the wheel down on the ground, and he has a very good start, where the rider number 354 had a tendency to wheelie, which means that because his arms were down a little bit, that's what could have caused the problem. 125 starters. Again, rider number 1 has 1 foot up. Rider number 9 has 2 feet down. 224 has 1 foot up. And also rider number 4 has 1 foot up on the foot peg. All of their arms are up high, and they're in their aggressive and charged position to come off the starting line. Most important, again, is that you slip the clutch slightly coming off of the start and don't just jump the clutch. It takes a great deal of practice to be calm, to be cool, and to be relaxed when you're coming off the starting line and not have a tendency to wheelie all the time. This is an aggressive and a charged position. This allows you to keep the front end of the motorcycle down. It is not necessary, however, as most riders think, that you slide to the rear of the motorcycle in order to get traction at this point. If the bike happens to spin a little bit, catch the next gear. Do not slide yourself all the way back to the back of the motorcycle to try and get too much traction. Here's a rider coming off the line, and you can notice as he comes off the line that he's already got to his rear position on the motorcycle, trying to go for traction. And the main reason is because as he accelerated off and he turned his throttle on, it dropped his right arm down. His arm is in too close to his body, and it makes him push himself toward the back of the motorcycle in order to get into his relaxed position so that he's not cramped. This is not the position that you should be in going off of the starting line. If you'll notice in the pro shots that you see, you'll notice that you don't see any riders hanging off the back of the bike. Here's the rider getting ready to start, and as he takes off, he dumps the clutch, turns the throttle wide open, and goes into a wheelie. The first place that it puts him on the bike is at the very back of the motorcycle. It's difficult when the front end comes up to try and keep yourself well forward. It has a tendency to slide you to the back. Again, these riders are starting with both feet down on the ground to keep the bike in the straightest possible line going off the start. Starts are very important, as you know, and getting that good reaction and being smooth is very important. Now, if you'll notice, here we're looking at Bob Hanna on the very inside. Hanna got a little bit of a poor start, but having the incredible balance that he does, he was able to bring the bike back under control and get his charge going again. Also, he holds the very inside of the corner rather than let himself drift wide, and still comes out with an excellent start after having a problem on the start, getting a little bit sideways, and also getting a little off balance coming around the first turn. Be careful on the backward falling gates, and if you get stuck in one of those, lean the bike over to about a 45-degree angle and pull the bike back out of the gate rather than to try and pull it straight out, because sometimes the bike gets jammed up underneath the gate and it won't allow it to roll backwards. It's also a very good idea if you don't put the bike in gear too soon. You should not put the bike in gear till about the 5-second sign. Practicing entering corners and learning to be loose and ride defensive is very important, particularly whenever the track tends to be a little bit muddy or slick. Come into the corner and ride defensive. Work the bike and be ready for any possible problems. Don't wait till the bike gets totally out of control before you try and correct the problem. Knowing when you're coming into the corner or when you're leaving from the corner that the bike is going to have a tendency to get sideways, and that you're going to have to make some corrections. Knowing that if the bike slides a little bit to the outside, that you're going to have to move your weight more to the outside in order to get traction. If you ride defensive and work the bike constantly, you don't find yourself off balance. There's not as much chance of getting yourself in trouble and crashing. Stay loose, stay relaxed, work the bike from side to side slightly. It's a defensive motion that you must learn if you want to ride smooth. If you get down into the deep mud, it's important most of all that you never stop your forward motion, that you keep the throttle on full all the time to keep the front end from plowing into the mud. Most riders, when they hit a real deep muddy spot, have a tendency to shut off, and it buries the front end more. Working the bike all the way through the turn is extremely important. Keeping your leg up as high as possible and try and not let it make contact with the ground any more than is necessary. Some riders have a tendency to get into the corner and just gallop it wide open before they're even ready, before they've even got themselves set into the turn. the bike has a tendency to wheelie, to get them off balance, and as you can see here, several riders end up laying on the ground because of lack of control in this type of muddy situation. Learning to ride the mud is very important, and you should ride the mud more like you do when it's dry. Now, all riders can make mistakes. Even some of the best riders there are have a tendency to go into the corner sometimes, maybe because of lack of concentration, or just because it's muddy, the front wheel hits a slick spot and the bike gets out from underneath them. When you're entering the corner, your weight, your head should be located directly over the bars. Your arms should be up slightly. The proper point to set down for a corner is as soon as possible, usually as soon as you go past the last big bump. As the bike kicks up in the air, the back end will come up, the rider will be standing at that point. As the bike starts to drop down, going into the turn, as it comes over the last bump, the rider should set his weight forward at that point. His legs should start extending, legs should be extended high, fingers should be on the clutch. Slipping the clutch through this type of corner is just as important as slipping the clutch off the starting line. The bike has a tendency under too much power to go over the top of the berm. If the rider goes in and turns the throttle off and is leaned over this bar, the bike will have a tendency to fall to the inside of the corner. The rider should keep his leg up high, keep his weight well forward, and keep the gas on as hard as he possibly can, and be slipping the clutch and actually using the clutch as his throttle going through the turn. You notice this rider comes to the corner, his arms are much further down coming into the turn. As he sits down, he sits in the middle of the seat, does not extend his leg, and his foot catches 2 or 3 times going around this corner, which has a tendency to straighten the bike up. Every time your foot touches the ground going around a corner, it straightens the bike upward. Good leg extension, but the front wheel goes over the top of the berm. Lack of concentration. You have to look at the berm, and the wheels have to be on the wall of the berm. You have to lay to the inside and keep the bike leaned over all the way around the corner. Rider's throttle hand is too far down. If your arm is too far down in that type of a corner, the outside arm, you will have a tendency to drift over the top of the berm. As this rider comes into the corner, you'll notice that his arms are considerably down. The rider is very tall, but his arms are down so low that he does not have control over the front end of the motorcycle. And as the front forks start going up and down, the rider cannot work with the forks well, so he loses control. Another shot of the same corner we were just looking at. You can see the rider as he enters the corner that his arms are up well, working with the suspension, coming into the corner, arms working very well with the front forks. As he gets into the corner, the body weight leans into the inside of the turn, the same angle as the motorcycle when you're riding a berm. The rider should be riding on the wall of the berm, not on the bottom of the berm, not too high up on the top where the berm's going to have a tendency to give away. Leg is extended very high. Sometimes the rider will have a tendency to slide back at this point to possibly wheelie over bumps coming out of the corner. Another rider coming into the same corner, you can notice how as his arm's down, when he hits that bump, it has a natural tendency to throw his weight forward because he's unable to work with the front forks. Arms working again with the suspension. Body sets down just as soon as he hits the last bump, and the back end kicks up. When it drops, the rider sets, the leg extends, the weight leans to the inside of the corner. Once again, the same technique. You can see the rider working the motorcycle, being very defensive coming out of the corner. Weight gets back just a little bit. Now remember, the rider's height is going to make a difference as how far his butt gets toward the rear end of the motorcycle. However, if you'll notice these riders as they ride, you'll notice their head and their arms stay over the front end of the motorcycle about 90-95% of the time. If this rider were back at this point right here when this front end swaps, he would never be able to save that motorcycle. It's important that you have total control over the front end of the motorcycle all the time. A hard acceleration coming off the jump is very important, and it's important that you have the nose down when you're landing on the other side of a jump, on the down side of a jump, with the power full on to get the full drive away. Again, body position. We're looking at Florida whoop-de-doos now, so this is sand tracks where most people think that they still have to ride on the back of the motorcycle when they get to the sand, and because it's rough, it's totally not true. Every time that the rider's arms extend, he immediately pulls himself back forward. It's important that you try as little as possible to make sure that your arms never get fully extended. Always leave some slight bend in your arms so that you can absorb, so that you can work with the suspension, so that if the front end gets a little too high and it slaps the front end down, there's some motion left in your arms so it doesn't jerk your body forward. Body position is probably one of the very most important things that you need to remember when you're riding. Keep your weight well forward. Keep your head and your shoulders always over the triple clamps. Depending on the height of the rider and the size of the motorcycle will determine approximately where your rear will be in relation to the back end of the motorcycle. You want to try as much as possible to keep yourself in your aggressive and your charged position. Every time that it's possible to sit down and get your drive going again, sit down and get your drive going. Stay loose, stay relaxed, and try to stay away from the rear end of the motorcycle. Arms up, head over the front end, letting the bike work, letting all of his troubles, all of his problems be behind him, trying to stay as much away from the rear end of the motorcycle as possible. Learning to absorb and learning to rebound with the suspension. Working with the bike all the time, in every movement that it makes, you never fight the motorcycle. The bike has certain motions that it has to make, that it will make when it's out there riding, when you're out there riding. Make sure that you let the bike work. Most riders have a tendency to try to make the bike do something that it doesn't want to do. Your main job is to make sure that the bike goes where you want it to go, and to learn how to work with it and to make it go there, not to fight it and to force it. Getting too far back on the back of the motorcycle can cause problems. However, it works as long as everything goes right and as long as you don't hit any big holes or the bike doesn't swap around sideways. The question is, how many laps do you make when everything stays perfect all of the time? Keep your legs loose all the time. And be careful when you're going into a very rough section and you've got the brakes on. The bike will have a tendency to swap more on the back end. If it starts that, it's easy to turn the power on a little bit while you're still braking, and it will help to straighten the bike out. Riding through whoop-de-doos and getting your timing is extremely important. These riders are taking these jumps 2 at a time because it allows you to go faster and to go smoother through them. Learning proper jumping technique is very important, and learning how to make the bike do what you want it to do all of the time. It's best that you keep the nose down when landing on the other side of a double jump. If you have a tendency to pull the front end up high, it will have a tendency to slap the front end down. The higher you pull the front end up over a jump, the harder it's going to slap the front end down whenever you land. Instead of whoop-de-doos where it's difficult to get timing in because they're entirely too close together, it's important that you keep your weight more forward, staying away from the rear end of the seat. Keep 1 finger or 2 fingers on the clutch so that you can keep a constant power going through there all the time. It's very difficult to control it with the throttle only. The rider gets too far to the back of the motorcycle and stretches out every bump he hits. As soon as he hits 1 bump and it kicks the back end up too high, it's going to have a tendency to try and throw him over the handlebars. Do not extend your arms fully. Jumping into a small pit and coming right back out again. Being able to turn the bike and maneuver the bike in the air to put the bike where you want it to so that you can make a direction change is extremely important. Also, anytime you're jumping in a downhill or into a pit, it's important as you approach the pit that you possibly find a place to pre-jump. Pre-jump meaning that you jump before you ever get to the top so that you can leave the ground early and land on the downside of a jump, the downside of a downhill, dropping into the bottom of a pit. Otherwise, you might find yourself jumping and landing on the face on the other side and getting a very hard impact. Keeping your weight forward once you have exited from the pit is very important. Getting yourself in your aggressive, into your charged position. Working the bike, flowing, never fighting the motorcycle, learning to work with the motorcycle all the time. The more of the forward position with your total body, your upper part of your body, more in the forward position toward the handlebars, will allow you to work with the bike more and have a lot more control. If you get too far back or stiffen up whenever you jump into the face on the other side because you didn't pre-jump, it will have a tendency, again, to impact and rebound so fast that your body can't keep up with it. Sometimes you save it, sometimes you don't. Double jumping is very important in learning how to do it properly. And the mistake that most riders make is they look at a set of double jumps and they ask themselves the question, how do I make this set of double jumps? I think more important is what's going to happen if you don't make the set of double jumps. Learning how to practice a set of double jumps is very important. Learning to land on the downside of the jump and not just completely clearing it. Learning to land on the downside with the power on and accelerating away. Practicing not making a set of double jumps is important. Learning to jump from short and land on the face. Learning how to absorb the impact and the rebound, and experimenting with different body positions to see what the bike's going to do to you if you don't make that jump. When you reach the other side and you've made a good jump, your body weight should be forward. You should be in your aggressive, in your attack, your charged position whenever you land with the power full on. If you land with the power off and you hit the top of the jump with the rear wheel, it will have a natural tendency to throw the back end of the bike into the air. Compress and then rebound as you leave the top of the jump. Now when you land on the jump and you're practicing landing on the jump and not clearing it all the way, it's important that you remember that if your weight's too far back, the back end of the motorcycle is going to kick up. If your weight's forward and it kicks, it will not throw your body forward. Let your rear wheel actually hit right on the top of the double jump and practice and feel what that impact is like. Be sure when you go to a set of double jumps that you don't pull the front end too high, because if you pull the front end towards you, it will have a tendency to pull the front end too high and loop the motorcycle upside down. It's also very difficult to be under power whenever you land if the front end's too high in the air. Now practicing landing on the face of the jump. If you can survive this when you're practicing and you do it at a slow speed and build your confidence, when you go to jump the jump and to try and clear it, you will be more relaxed, and if you make a mistake, if you realize you're not going to make it, there won't be any problem. Learn your speed before you try to jump a set of double jumps. Learn the proper speed and how fast you should be going. The bike should be at the same angle as the downside of the jump that you're landing on, so that the bike will land soft. You don't want to jump out past the jump and land on the flat, because it's going to be a much harder landing. Also, you'll be able to be on the power and to be charging away. Once again, don't pull the front end too high. The rider weight gets too far to the back of the motorcycle, it slaps the front end to the ground, and the rider cannot keep up with it. This is a very good jump position here. Rider weight's forward, legs are bent. Rider's arms could be up just a slight bit more, but he's going to get a very good landing here, so it won't be a problem. His arms would be too far down if we were going to land on the face of the jump. Front end, once again, too high going over the jump. Now, at this point, when the rider's rear wheel hits the jump, if he moves his weight forward, and if he gets on the gas, it'll keep the back end from kicking. If the rider stays toward the back of the motorcycle, clear at the back of the seat by the fender, he's got a very good chance of getting kicked and being pitched forward. Body position in the middle of the motorcycle, letting the bike work. Most riders use entirely too much energy, entirely too much effort trying to make the motorcycle do something that it doesn't want to do. You need to learn to work with the suspension and go and flow with the motorcycle and what it's doing. Don't always try and hang off the back of the motorcycle. Don't always try and spring the motorcycle up in the air. Just go with the bike. If you hit a jump aggressive enough, the suspension is going to compress and it's going to rebound, and you're going to get all the spring that you need. If you need a little more distance over a jump because you want to jump a little bit further, if you set down when you approach the jump and set down through the jump, it will compress the suspension. The suspension will impact hard. It will rebound hard. And if you stand as you reach the top of the jump, it will let the bike jump further. When you stand up many times over a jump, it has a tendency to not use as much of the suspension into the jump, so therefore it doesn't jump as far. So the question is, how far do you want to jump over a jump, which will determine whether you should hit that jump sitting down or whether you should hit it standing up. Also, make sure you don't get the front end too high in the air, because you can get yourself in big trouble this way, and when it hits, it can easily throw you over the handlebars. If you land because the front end impacts and it rebounds with the power full on, it's going to have a natural tendency to wheelie immediately whenever the front wheel comes down to the ground. It's important that you have your hand on the clutch and that you slip the clutch as you take off. Again, the weight too far back. Rear end kicks when it hits the lip because the front end was too high, and it throws the rider up over the handlebars. Again, the front end's a little bit too high for landing on this double jump. The bike should actually be at the same angle as the down ramp of the jump that you're looking at there. This front end is entirely too high, and the rider is too stiff on the motorcycle. The problem at many amateur races that you see is riders play follow the leader. Here's a racetrack about 25 feet wide, and all riders use the same line going down through there. I think there's only one rider all the way through here that actually gets out of this line. When you complain about, oh, the racetrack's only one line and there's no place to pass, remember, you're the one that made it that way, no one else. Approximately 15 riders down the same straightaway, and they're all running the same line, and it makes it impossible to pass, and should the rider in front of you crash, you're going to be a part of his problems. Learn to use several different lines around the racetrack and not play follow the leader. And when there's a crash, you should be looking far enough ahead of you that you can see the crash in front of you and you don't go along and run into it. Look ahead when you're riding. Remember, practice is the most important thing. What you practice and how you practice. And if you want to be a professional, don't just say, I'm a professional. Act like one, on the track and off of the track. Support the people that support you. All of your sponsors, everyone that helps you, be sure to let them know and give them special thanks for the job that they're doing to help you get where you are. If you're interested in a 4-day class in Axford, Virginia, we have bikes available there. We have a complete workshop for any necessary repairs of the motorcycle. We also have a complete accessory room with all of the up-to-date accessories. We have a game room full of video games, pinball, ping pong, air hockey, things for the riders to do at nighttime after they've completed their day's riding. We also have a trampoline for those that would like to have fun or do it purely for exercise. Trampolines are very good for your coordination. Also, horseshoes. If anyone would like to challenge the two Axton champions. Also available for those in the summertime that would be interested in swimming after a long, hot day out on the racetrack. We have a swimming pool available with 2 water slides. However, some prefer to not use the water slides.